My name's Jack Turner. 80 years ago, I was 21, a kid with oil under his nails and the sky in his blood. They called us Thunderbolt boys. We flew the P-47, a monster of a machine, all steel and engine and noise. She wasn't pretty like a Mustang or nimble like a Spitfire, but she could take a hit and still bring you home. Back then, that was all that mattered. I've been asked many times what it felt like to fly in combat. People think it's glory. The wind in your face, the roar of the engine, the freedom. They never talk about what comes after the freedom. The silence, the kind that lives inside you for the rest of your life. It was July 1944 in northern France. We'd broken through the beaches, but the Germans weren't done yet. They were falling back toward the hedgerows. Thick country, old farms, villages that smelled of mud and smoke. That morning, our recon boys spotted a German column moving through a valley. Trucks, half-tracks, infantry, maybe 60, 70 men. We got the call. Take them out before they reach the ridge. Simple words, just another mission. I remember climbing into my P-47, the Lucky Lily. She'd been hit more times than I could count, but she still purred when I touched the throttle. My crew chief, Sergeant Wilkins, gave me a pat on the shoulder and said, "Bring her back, Captain." I nodded, pretending not to hear the fear in his voice. We took off in a flight of 4, climbing through scattered clouds until the world below looked like a map. The radio crackled with voices, check-ins, coordinates, laughter that sounded too loud to be real. War makes you laugh when you shouldn't. It's how you stay sane. Then command came through. Enemy armor confirmed. Grid 7-2. Good hunting, boys. We found them about 15 minutes later. A convoy snaking through a narrow road between 2 tree lines, trucks, motorcycles, a couple of light tanks. They moved slow, thinking the trees hid them. They didn't. From above, I could see everything. Men sitting in open trucks, rifles across their laps, helmets catching sunlight. They looked small, almost fragile. "All right, Thunderflight, line up. Standard attack pattern. Jack, you're first." I rolled over, nose down, throttle wide open. The P-47 screamed like a beast unleashed. The ground rushed up to meet me. At 500 feet, I hit the triggers. 8.50 caliber Brownings opened fire. The sound was like tearing the sky itself apart. I watched tracers walk across the column. Trucks exploding, men scattering, dirt flying in every direction. The first pass was over in seconds. I pulled up hard, feeling the GS crush me into the seat. "Good hits. Lucky Lily," someone shouted over the radio. "They're running." I turned back, looping around for another pass. The valley was chaos now. Smoke rising, vehicles burning, figures running for cover. I dropped 2 500-pounders right into the middle of it. The explosions lifted half the road into the air. When the dust cleared, there was nothing left that moved. The rest of my flight finished the job. A third pass, then a fourth. Machine guns tore through the hedgerows. By the time we pulled out, it was done. The column was gone. Just black smoke curling up to the heavens. We headed home in silence. Back at the base, they called it a perfect strike. 50-plus enemy dead. The report said, no friendly casualties. Command congratulated us. My crew chief slapped me on the back. "You cooked them good, Captain," he said. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep. The noise of the guns still echoed in my ears. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that road. The flashes, the fire, the way tiny dark figures ran in panic. They weren't soldiers anymore. Not in that moment. They were just men trying to survive. The next morning, they sent us back to cover ground troops, pushing through that same valley. I looked down as we flew over the area we'd hit. The smoke had cleared. What was left looked human. The trucks were twisted heaps, and the field were dotted with bodies. Some were burned, some weren't. There were boots, helmets, rifles, and, among them, something that froze me. A white sheet. It took me a moment to understand what I was looking at, a Red Cross flag. One of the trucks had been an ambulance. My hands went cold on the stick. I wanted to believe it wasn't real, that it had been moved there later, that we hadn't seen it. But deep down, I knew in war, mistakes don't ask permission. I didn't tell anyone, not my CO, not the others. What good would it have done? The mission was done. The war rolled on. There was always another target, always another valley. Weeks later, we moved east. More flights, more kills, more medals. But after that day, every explosion sounded different. I stopped seeing targets. I started seeing people. Once in a small French town we liberated, I met a little girl, maybe 8 years old. She gave me flowers and said, "Merci, monsieur." I smiled, but inside, all I could think was, what if she'd been on that road? Years later, after the war, I read about that engagement in a military book. It said a single P-47 pilot decimated an entire German infantry unit in one strike, a masterful act of precision air support. They made it sound like poetry. I closed the book and put it away. Precision. That's what they called it. But I remember the faces, the smoke, the white sheet. I know what it really was. War makes heroes, but it also makes ghosts. And I've learned it can be both at once. I didn't talk about that mission for a long time. Not to my crew, not to the brass, not even to the chaplain. It was easier to let everyone call it what they wanted: victory, precision, skill. But when I closed my eyes at night, I saw things no metal could erase. We kept flying, every day new targets, new coordinates, bridges, trains, convoys. The war was moving fast now, and the Thunderbolts were the hammer that broke what was left of the German lines. You learn not to think too much. Thinking gets you killed, but the thing about guilt is it doesn't wait for quiet moments. It follows you even above the clouds. The sound of the guns never really leaves you. The vibration of the stick, the flash of tracers, the smoke trailing behind a burning truck, it gets under your skin. The day after that mission, I was flying cover for a tank column near St. Lo. It was a routine sortie. Find enemy armor, strafe, and get out, but all I could see were the faces. Every time I squeezed the trigger, I imagined the men inside. By August, the Germans were retreating everywhere. They were desperate, boys, old men, anything that could hold a rifle. We started seeing white flags painted on roofs, bed sheets hung from windows. Sometimes when we flew over a town, the people waved. Sometimes they just stared. You could never tell which ones hated you and which ones prayed for you. One day, after a mission over Mortain, our squadron was ordered to refuel at an improvised field near a captured village. I remember stepping out of the cockpit, stretching my legs, the engines still ticking with heat. A group of GIs were herding a line of German prisoners through the square. They looked like ghosts, filthy, starving, uniforms torn. Most had no boots. One of them tripped and fell, and the sergeant kicked him up with a curse. That's when I saw him. He was older than the others, maybe 45. His face was gray with dust and beard, but his eyes were clear, calm, steady. He wasn't afraid. Not like the rest. He was watching everything, like he'd already accepted it. I don't know why, but I walked over. The sergeant stopped me. "Sir, these bastards aren't worth your time." "Just a minute," I said. I looked at the man. He looked back at me. No hate, no fear, just curiosity. I pointed at the iron cross on his tattered tunic. "You an officer?" He nodded once. "Lieutenant," he said. "Speak English?" "A little." We stood there, surrounded by noise, engines shouting, the chaos of victory. But it felt quiet between us. I asked him, "You were in that convoy 2 days ago near the Valley Road?" He hesitated, then nodded again. "You were there?" I asked. "Yes," he said softly, "I was." My throat went dry. "How many were in your unit?" 80, he said. "Maybe more." I couldn't speak for a moment. Then I said, "There was a Red Cross truck." He looked at me, and for a second I thought he didn't understand. Then his eyes dropped to the ground. "Yes," he said, "my wife, she was nurse." I felt the air leave my lungs. The sergeant shouted something behind me, but I didn't hear it. He looked up again and said, "You did your duty." "So did we." I didn't answer. I turned and walked away. That night, I sat beside the plane and stared at the stars. The world was quiet again, the kind of quiet that hurts your ears. I thought about that man, about his voice. Not angry, not bitter, just tired like me. You spend your youth thinking war is noise and chaos. But the truth is, it's the silence after that kills you. The next week, I was almost shot down. We were escorting a bombing run over Rouen when the flak opened up from the clouds, black bursts everywhere, shaking the sky. One hit close enough to rattle my teeth. A fragment sliced through the canopy and nicked my shoulder. I lost hydraulics on the right wing. The plane started rolling, screaming. I fought it all the way down, praying the engine would hold. It didn't. I bailed out at about 3,000 feet. The chute opened hard. I remember spinning, the sky flipping, the smell of smoke. Then silence, just the wind, the earth rising fast. I hit a wheat field, hard enough to knock the air out of me. My legs screamed in pain. I crawled to a ditch and lay there for what felt like hours. When I finally woke, it was night. The stars were out again, the same stars I'd seen from 10,000 feet. Only now I was on the ground, bleeding, alone. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbled. At dawn, French farmers found me. They were cautious at first, thought I might be German, but once they saw the uniform, they carried me to their barn and patched me up. There was a girl there, maybe 16. She gave me water and bread. I tried to thank her in broken French, but she just smiled and said, "No merci. Vous êtes le ciel." You're the sky. I stayed with them for 2 days until our boys reached the area. They saved my life, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't deserve it. Not after what I'd done. When I got back to base, they called me a hero. "You took out an entire German unit, Captain. That's legendary stuff," one of the new lieutenants said. I just nodded. They gave me a medal later. I put in a drawer. Sometimes I wonder what happened to that German officer, the one with the calm eyes, whether he survived the march to the camp or died somewhere nameless. I like to think he made it home. I like to think someone did. The war went on, but something in me changed after that. I stopped feeling the rush when we took off. I started noticing the faces of the ground crews. Kids barely out of high school, working with hands that trembled. I started writing letters to the families of men we lost. I didn't know them, but it made me feel like maybe I was putting something right. In September, we flew one of our last missions, a rail yard in Belgium. We hit the target clean, no losses. When we came back, I stayed in the cockpit after shutdown, just sitting there while the others climbed out. The engine ticked as it cooled. The smell of oil and gunpowder filled the air. I thought about all the men who wouldn't be going home. That was the day I realized the war wasn't about killing or winning. It was about surviving what you become. By winter, the war had turned into something colder than the weather. They called it the final push. The Germans were retreating east, but every mile felt like another trap. The air smelled of smoke and snow. Even the sky seemed tired of it all. In December, they sent us north, the Ardennes, thick forests, frozen rivers, small villages buried under ice and fear. The Germans had launched one last counterattack. The Battle of the Bulge. We were flying low, hunting tanks and convoys caught between the trees. The weather was hell, gray skies, freezing wind, visibility near zero. You don't think about dying in war, not really, but that month death sat in the cockpit with us. We took off before dawn. There were 6 of us that morning. Engines growling in the fog. The mission brief was simple. Enemy armor spotted near crossroads outside Bastogne. Destroy everything that moves. The radio crackled as we climbed. "Thunder flight, keep tight, watch your 6." At 5,000 feet, the clouds swallowed us whole. I couldn't see the lead plane, couldn't even see my own wingtips. My breath froze on the inside of the canopy. The altimeter needle trembled like it was afraid. Then, through a gap in the clouds, I saw it, a column of German vehicles crawling through a snow-covered valley. Trucks, tanks, horses even. It looked almost peaceful from up there, like toy soldiers marching across a white table. I rolled over in duff. The Thunderbolt roared, the engine howling against the cold. I opened fire at 300 feet. Tracers ripped through the snow, tearing into the first truck. Flames burst, orange against white. The blast knocked men off their feet. I saw them running, tiny black dots scattering like ants. The radio was alive now, shouts, gunfire, panic. "Targets at 2 o'clock. Tank on the ridge. I'm hit, smoke, smoke." I made another pass, dropped a pair of bombs straight into the center of the convoy. The explosion lifted a tank into the air like a toy. When I pulled up, I saw something that stayed with me all these years. There was a man, just one, standing in the middle of the road. His uniform was torn, his rifle gone. He was staring straight at me. He didn't move, didn't run. I don't know if he was brave or broken, maybe both. The next second, he was gone. By the time we regrouped, half the column was burning. The snow around it was red and black. My wingman, Harris, didn't make it back. Flak got him on the last pass. We saw his chute open, then drift into the trees. He never came home. When I landed, my hand was shaking so bad I couldn't undo the harness. The ground crew pulled me out, laughing like always. "Another one for the history books, Captain," they said. I couldn't even look them in the eye. That night, I walked to the edge of the field where the wrecks of old planes lay half buried in snow. The moon was out, pale and cruel. I thought of Harris. I thought of that man in the road. The next morning, our intelligence officer came in with a report. Locals had found the German convoy we hit, dozens dead. He grinned as he told it. "Nice work, Turner. The villagers say the pilot came down like an angel from the clouds, wiped out the whole unit in 2 minutes flat." I nodded, but something about the way he said angel made my stomach turn. 2 weeks later, We were grounded by weather in a small French town near Dinant. I stayed in a church-turned barracks, stone walls cold as the grave. The locals avoided us mostly, except one old woman who brought bread and soup. One night, she pointed at the sky, then at me, and whispered something to the translator. He looked uncomfortable. I asked, "What did she say?" He hesitated. "She says you are l'ange de la mort, the angel of death." I laughed at first, thought it was a joke, but the look in her eyes wasn't fear. It was pity, like she saw what I was before I did. After that, I couldn't shake the name. The mechanics started using it too, half in jest. "Hey, Angel, ready to go reap another harvest?" They thought it was funny. I didn't. In January, the weather cleared, and the war moved east again. The Germans were breaking apart. We strafed what was left of their supply lines. Wagons, fuel trucks, sometimes just scattered groups of soldiers trying to escape. There was no glory left, just survival. One day, while scouting a frozen road near Liège, I saw a small farmhouse below, roof half gone, smoke rising from the chimney. A German truck was parked outside. I lined up for a run. Instinct habit, but something stopped me. Through the shattered roof, I saw movement, not soldiers, children. Two of them, huddled under a blanket. I pulled up so hard the wings groaned. My vision went black at the edges. I circled once, just to be sure. The truck was empty, probably abandoned, but the image of those kids stayed burned behind my eyes. That's when I realized I couldn't tell the difference anymore, between targets and lives, between duty and murder, between hero and monster. A week later, I asked to be reassigned to reconnaissance. No guns, no bombing, just observation. The CO laughed. "You're our best killer, Turner. What's gotten into you?" I didn't answer. He didn't approve the transfer. So I kept flying, kept killing. By spring, the war was almost done. Germany was collapsing. Surrender was weeks away. But the missions didn't stop. There was always one more. Always someone left to burn. In April 1945, I flew my last combat sortie near Kassel. We hit a train carrying ammunition. The explosion lit the sky like a sunrise. I remember the heat on my face. Even from 1,000 feet up, when we landed, the CO said, "Congratulations, boys, that's probably your last one." We all cheered, but inside I felt nothing. That night, I walked out to the airfield one last time. The snow was melting, the mud deep. My plane stood there in the dark, streaked with soot, its nose painted with the words "Lucky Lily." The name felt wrong now, like a joke at the expense of all the unlucky ones. I reached up and ran my hand along the bullet holes patched in the fuselage. Each one was a story. Each one could have been the end. And then I realized maybe it already was. They told us the war was over on a warm May morning. Someone burst into the barracks shouting, "They've surrendered. It's done." The room exploded in cheers, laughter, tears. Men hugged each other, threw helmets, kissed photographs. The air was full of joy. Wild, unreal, almost frightened joy. I didn't feel anything. I walked outside and looked at the sky for the first time in years. There were no bombers, no smoke trails, no gunfire echoing in the distance, just blue, empty, endless blue, the same sky I'd spent half my life fighting in. Only now it looked like a stranger. That night, we celebrated anyway, whiskey, songs, shouting. Someone fired a flare into the air, and everyone ducked on instinct. We laughed after, but it wasn't real laughter, just noise to fill the silence. A few weeks later, they sent me home. We landed in New York in June. The city was covered in flags and music. People lined the streets, waving, throwing confetti. The air smelled like summer and gasoline. A woman kissed me on the cheek and said, "Thank you for bringing us peace." I didn't know how to tell her peace was the one thing I hadn't brought home. They called it demobilization, but it felt more like being unplugged from a world that still hummed inside my head. The first night in my old room, I couldn't sleep, too quiet. I left the window open, hoping for some noise, when a car backfired down the street. I flinched so hard I hit the floor. I told myself it would fade, it didn't. I got a job flying crop dusters in Kansas that fall. The company said they liked hiring veterans. Good reflexes, no fear of heights. They didn't know that fear wasn't the problem, it was the quiet. Flying low over fields, the engine humming steady. I sometimes forgot where I was. The lines of wheat below blurred into convoys, roads, smoke. I'd blink, and the illusion would vanish, but my hand stayed tight on the stick long after. At night, I dreamed of fire, not battles, just fire slow, spreading, soundless. My parents were proud, though. My father had fought in the Great War. Came home with a limp and a silence I'd never understood until now. When he looked at me across the dinner table, he didn't ask questions. He just nodded once, like we shared a language no one else spoke. I tried dating again. There was a nurse, Emily, kind, patient, with eyes that didn't flinch when I went quiet mid-sentence. We'd walk by the lake, talk about everything but the war for a while. I thought maybe she could be the reason I stopped remembering. One evening, she asked me what it felt like to fly, to fight. I told her the truth. It felt like power, until it didn't. She didn't ask again. We married a year later. I told myself that meant I moved on, but marriage doesn't cure ghosts. It just teaches you how to hide them better. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd wake up reaching for a control stick that wasn't there. Emily would find me sitting on the porch, smoking, staring at the stars. She'd say, "Jack, come back to bed." And I'd say, "I'm trying." But I never told her what I was really seeing: the faces, the wreckage, the man in the road, the Red Cross sheet. I kept the medal they gave me in a drawer. One day, I found our son. He was 6 then, holding it. "Daddy, is this for being brave?" he asked. I said, "No, it's for being lucky." When he was older, he asked if I'd ever killed anyone. I told him the truth he could handle. I stopped bad people from hurting others. He nodded, proud. I didn't tell him the rest. In the 1950s, the Air Force sent me a letter, an invitation to a reunion for fighter pilots. I went, though I wasn't sure why. We met in a hotel ballroom, all older, heavier, grayer. We told the same stories. The ones with clean endings. Nobody told the ones that kept them awake. That night, after the toast and laughter, I stepped outside for air. A man followed me. One of the old pilots from our squadron. He'd flown next to me during the Ardennes. His name was O'Neill. He lit a cigarette and said, "Do you ever think about it?" I asked about what. He exhaled smoke into the dark. "About what we did, about all of it." "All the time," I said. He nodded slowly. "Me too." Then, after a pause, "They say we save lives. Maybe that's true, but I think sometimes about the ones on the other side, the ones who didn't get to go home." Neither of us spoke for a long time after that. Just two old men staring at the night sky, listening to the faint hum of cars that sounded too much like engines. Over the years, I tried to write it down. The truth of it, not the version for newspapers or history books, but words never felt enough. Every sentence felt like a lie because no words can capture the noise, the smell, the weight. In 1962, I visited France again. Emily convinced me. "You'll find closure," she said. I doubted it, but I went. I rented a car and drove through the same countryside I'd once bombed from the sky. The fields were green now, the villages rebuilt. Children played where there'd once been craters. Near St. Lo, I stopped at a small cemetery, dozens of white crosses in neat rows, stretching to the horizon. American and German both. The caretaker told me some of the graves were still unknown. I walked through the rows until I couldn't feel my legs. Then I saw one small wooden marker at the edge, half covered in grass. The name had faded, but I could still make out one word carved into it. Schwester, nurse. I knew then where I was. I knelt, touched the marker, and whispered, "I'm sorry." The wind moved through the trees. No answer came, but the silence felt softer somehow. When I got back home, Emily asked how it was. I said, "Quiet." She smiled. "That's good." But quiet doesn't always mean peace. The years went on. I taught flying for a while, then retired, watched my son grow up, go to college, have kids of his own. He became a pilot too. The day he told me he wanted to join the Air Force, I felt pride and dread in the same breath. I told him, "Just promise me one thing, that you'll remember the ground when you're up there." He didn't understand then. He does now. Sometimes he asks me about the war. I tell him the same thing every time. It wasn't about glory. It was about men trying not to die. He nods, but I see the curiosity in his eyes, the same hunger for the sky I once had. Now I'm old. My hands shake when I hold a pen. The world has changed 1,000 times, but some nights when the wind blows just right, I can still hear that engine, still smell the oil, the smoke, the fear. I used to think the war ended in 1945, but it didn't. It just moved inside us. Some men die in battle. Others spend their lives trying to. The years after retirement pass quietly, at least on the surface. People say time heals all wounds. Maybe that's true for the body, but the mind keeps its own calendar. It remembers every noise, every flash, every voice that never came back on the radio. I kept flying for a while. Small planes, local air shows, nothing dangerous, just the comfort of the sky. But even then, sometimes I glance at the wing and expect to see smoke. Sometimes when I landed, I'd catch myself whispering, "Target neutralized." Old habits die harder than men do. Emily passed away before me, peacefully. In her sleep, the house felt emptier than any cockpit after that. I tried to fill the silence with the sound of the wind through the trees, with the ticking of old clocks. But there's a sound silence makes that no one warns you about. It's the sound of memory when there's no one left to listen. My son visited often. He brought his kids, and they'd ask me about the old war. One afternoon, my grandson, no older than 10, pointed to a faded picture on the wall. Me standing beside the lucky Lily, grinning, goggles around my neck, the world still young. "Grandpa," he said, "were you a hero?" I thought about it for a long time. "No," I said, "but I knew a few." He smiled and ran off to play. I stared at that photo long after he left. The man in it looked proud, sure of himself. I didn't recognize him anymore. After Emily's death, I started writing again. Not reports, not letters, just thoughts, memories that had nowhere else to go. I filled notebooks, page after page, with moments I'd kept buried for half a century. The day I first flew solo, the Red Cross sheet, the German officer's calm eyes, the snow turning black in the Ardennes, Harris's chute drifting into the trees, the nurse's grave. I wrote until my hands cramped, until the ink bled into the paper. Sometimes I'd stop mid-sentence and stare at the ceiling, wondering who I was really writing for. Maybe for the men who never made it home, maybe for my son, maybe for the sky itself. One night, I dreamed I was flying again, the same valley, the same clouds, only this time there were no targets, no gunfire, just light, endless, golden light stretching to the horizon. And in that light, I saw them, my crew, the others, all of them. They weren't burned or broken anymore. They were smiling, waving whole. I woke up crying, not from fear this time, but from something like peace. The next morning, I went out to the hangar behind the house. The Lucky Lily's propeller hung there, polished like new. My son had saved it after the war, had it mounted on the wall as a keepsake. I stood there for a while, tracing the dents along the edge with my fingers. Every mark was a story. Every scar had a name. People think medals are what soldiers leave behind. They're wrong. What we really leave is silence, and the hope that someone will break it. That's why I decided to record my story, not for fame, not for absolution, just so no one forgets what it costs to survive. Because the truth is, war doesn't end when the guns stop. It ends when the last person remembers. And I can feel the day coming when I'll be the last one. In my final notebook, on the very last page, I wrote, "I flew, I fought, I killed, I lived." But most of all, I remembered. If someone ever finds this, tell them the sky never belonged to heroes. It belonged to the ones who came back and learned how to live with it. That's all I wanted to say. Now I sit here, an old man with more ghosts than years, watching the evening light fade through the window. The wind outside still sounds like an engine at idle. Sometimes I close my eyes and pretend I'm climbing again. The world small below, the clouds ahead waiting to open. Maybe when my time comes, I'll find myself back there, in that endless sky, with my boys beside me, engines steady, wings level, heading home at last. And if I do, I'll look down and hope someone's still telling our story. Not because we were brave, but because we were human. Because history isn't made of battles and flags. It's made of voices. And the moment they go quiet, the past disappears for good. So if you're listening to this, if the sound of this story reached you somewhere deep inside, then you've become part of it. Keep it alive. Tell someone, remember the names that no one writes anymore. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories of courage, of loss, of men and women who carried the weight of history and never asked to, then stay with us. Subscribe to Battlefield Secrets, not for the glory, but for the memory, because the war ends only when we stop remembering.